What is the damage that has been sustained because of colonial rule and apartheid?
Whew. Let's go back to, I guess when you look at colonialism and when it was finally just organized in a way that we would then have the Africa that we have today. Mm-hmm. For Africa, I'll take it back to the Berlin Conference. That was held from November of 1884 to February of 1885. As you know, most people don't realize that the European nations were just haphazardly going into Africa and just stealing from the local people, and pretty soon they started stealing. The British would steal from the French, and the French would steal from the Spaniards, and pretty soon they were fighting each other. So the then Chancellor of Germany, Bismarck, in his efforts to prevent the European war on the African soil, he reached out to his sidekick, King Leopold of Belgium. Mm-hmm. And at that time, as you know, Belgium, King Leopold was wreaking havoc in the Congo. People are not aware that over 75% of the Congolese population was killed by Leopold. He actually claimed Congo was his own personal country. He owned it individually, not as Belgium. So you call Leopold and say, hey, we got a problem here. Can we come together and see if we can organize the manner in which we're going to loot from these people? So that's really how Berlin Conference was called together. So they brought all the countries that were making this mad rush into Africa so they could organize how they were looting the continent. So really, the Berlin Conference was not called for in order to make Africa better, but rather to see to it that they organize themselves so they can effectively exploit the Africans and also make sure that the continent and its people are forever defeated and dominated.
Does the looting go on today?
Oh, yes. The looting continues, but it has put on different clothes. Now, there's something else they did during the Berlin Conference. Because remember, after they had traveled around the continent, found some of the most powerful kingdoms with well-established educational and religious systems. I mean, the African people are just resilient. When you get to know the Africans, you understand the African spirit. And they knew that if they continued the same way they were going, they would never defeat the Africans. So they set in place a system of colonization and making the Africans believe that everything that was African was bad and everything that was European, particularly British and English, was better. So the seed of divide and conquer was also sown during the Berlin Conference. And they knew, just give it a generation or less, these people, not only are they going to be so divided, because they chopped us up into these small economies that really could never survive on their own. You take a country like Equatorial Guinea, Central African Republic, Malawi, Rwanda, Burundi, you know, they're economies that even if they struggle and begin to do better on their own, if the master decides you're becoming too smart, they're very easy to destabilize. Wow. And that's exactly what has been going on in our Africa. So Berlin Conference, people don't realize it was designed to see to it that the Africans are forever defeated. So for those who turn around and say, but Ambassador, don't talk about the Berlin Conference, it was a long time ago. And I'll say, as long as we have a country called Malawi, a country called Zimbabwe, a country called Central African Republic, all the African countries really for that matter, Berlin Conference is alive and well. Because that which they set out to do 123, 24 years ago, it's still in place. Nothing has changed. So how can they say Berlin Conference is a thing of history, don't talk about it? No, what's really sad and what should disgust the world is to say this policy was put in place 123 years ago and it is still in place and nothing has changed. But what's really worse is when you look at what France did to the Francophone countries in 1958, when they were living, quote unquote, leaving the continent. They gave the Francophone countries two choices. You can be independent with some affiliations to France, or you can be independent with no affiliations to France. Well, Guinea and Mali said, we are done with you, France, goodbye, leave us alone. That's how we had the first ever known union of any African states. They went into those two countries, took everything that they thought they had brought to them. History tells us they even took the last cup, teaspoon, chair, and proceeded to pour concrete into the sewage pipes, completely devastating the two economies, simply because they refused to be affiliated to France. But what they, and also the Sékou Touré, then president of Guinea at that time, he looked at the pact that France was making the Francophone countries sign. It was called the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. He refused to sign it.
How many countries in Africa?
Now we are sitting at 14 Francophone countries that are still held on to this pact.
So in 50-some countries in Africa altogether, were they all colonized?
Yes.
By different
countries?
Different countries?
The majority of the countries went to France,
yes,
Britain. We have Portuguese, we have Spanish, and those are the main ones.
You used the word looting before.
Yes.
The looting continues to this day?
To this day, it continues, but it has a different name.
So tell me what the name is.
Well, the exploitation of Africa continues. Again, let me go back to the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization, which is the biggest one. The Francophone countries were told, because we brought you the idea that you can sit at a table and eat with a fork and knife, we brought you tea, we built some roads and told you about going to school, we're going to call that colonial debt. So there's a fee for that, and you need to pay for it. They were also told that you must speak French as your official language, and it must be your language of instruction in schools, and we will be the one to design your educational system. And then also, your money. 85% of your bank reserves, you will keep them, you'll deposit them with the French bank, and we will take that money and invest it in the French stock market, but we don't have to tell you what the returns are on your money. So collectively, all the Francophone countries that signed that pact, their funds, the 85% of their bank reserves, are invested under French name.
We've got to hold that because we're getting behind on a little break.
You know, again, the problems that Africans are facing today are the problems of colonization. Colonization has taken new forms on the African continent, and in the African countries today. Colonization is not what it was. Colonization now is not what it was in the past. Now it has come to something called neo-imperialism or neo-colonialism, a modern form of colonization. In this modern form of colonization, now the colonizer is not representing himself by face, by physical. No, he's not doing that. Think of it as the indirect British colonization of countries, because the British had two methods. They had the direct rule and the indirect rule. The indirect rule, the British would send chiefs, and they would rule using companies such as the Imperial British West African companies, the Imperial British East African, and the Imperial British South African. So these companies would represent the interests of the British or the specific European nation. Today we have puppets. Yeah, that's the name that has been formed for these leaders who've been installed into power by the European powers. Yeah, the information is out there. It's not my words. The information is out there. So these puppets have been placed by colonial powers. Like, for example, say Mali. Mali was colonized by the French. So Mali is a French-speaking country because it was colonized by the French. You see how the colonizer influenced even the language of the people. And the language you speak also determines how you think, you know. So once the people of Mali gained independence, the colonizer went, but he came back. Now what they do is they plant their characters in place. They plant people whom they know they can pull strings and they can dance to their tune, you know. They place people whom they have an interest with. You see, the thing that happens in South America, in Afghanistan, in the Caribbean, Cuba, such countries, the US government plants seeds into the minds of the citizens, pointing out that that leader is a bad leader. And so once a leader is pointed as a bad leader, what they do is they try a revolution or they stage a coup. This coup is backed by the West. The West is backing this coup so that they can install a puppet. This puppet, because he's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces and he's the ruler of that nation, it's easy for those people from the West, the colonizer, to come and conquer this country and get their hands into their natural resources. For example, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, they have uranium, so it was easier for the French government to come and tap into that uranium and take it back home. While the people are suffering, the president was given his cut, you know. He was okay, the president was okay, but you can't compare the life of a president with the life of millions of the other people. The uranium does not belong to the president, it belongs to the people. And so in this video, Dr. Arikana Chihombori-Quao is trying to explain how this operation works, the operation of the neo-colonization, the operation how the colonialist is still operating in modern day. And we are going to learn much more from this, and this will make us Africans be reawakened. So I want us to watch this video. I'll give you my critical analysis in the end of the video. So let's dive in.
Thank you for having me.
But talk about Africa. When you look at Africa today, what do you see?
I see an amazing continent, a continent that is endowed with everything and anything the world could ever need. I see a continent that is full of hope, a continent that has some of the most incredible, resilient people I've ever met. When you really honestly look at what Africa and its people have been through, most other ethnic groups would be extinct by now. But we are resilient. We are human beings who are just so committed to survive against all odds. But nonetheless, we are waking up. We're also a continent that's been sleeping. Let me say we were put to sleep. We were awake, and then we were put to sleep. Now it's time that we wake up back to our greatness again.
About 50 countries, a little bit more, 50 countries?
55.
55. Population of Africa?
1.27 billion.
1.27 billion people. Give me a couple of success stories.
Success stories, we are having increased rates of literacy. We have many African countries that are increasing their GDPs. 6 of the top 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. So there's a lot of good news coming out of Africa. But again, because of this same strategy of branding Africa as a diseased and dying continent where people are constantly at war with each other, people are not seeing the good news out of Africa.
So what are the myths? What are the myths about Africa? Just name 3 things that we should get in our minds that when Africa is in the conversation or Africa is in the news, that we should be thinking about. 3 myths.
1, Africa is the richest continent on earth by far.
Hello?
No, yes. no continent comes even close. 1. 2, we are all Africans because life began in Africa. Life as we know it, I can tell you, my brother, right now, you do your DNA testing, I can tell you a good 50% of you is African. We are all Africans. And thirdly...
Proud to be.
Proud, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then thirdly, I want everybody to know about the wonderful news coming out of Africa. Remember we were talking about the Berlin Conference, how we were designed to fail through these little countries we were divided up? Well, guess what? Game is over. April this year, we saw our leaders come together and signing the African Continental Free Trade Agreement.
Yes.
Yes, so we have 50 countries that have already signed, and we're going through the process of ratifications. We only need 22 of the 50 to ratify. Already we have 10 ratifications deposited with the African Union.
So free trade agreement in Africa.
In Africa.
For African countries.
We're going to negotiate as one bloc. We have made a commitment as Africans that the only way we can survive, which is what our Pan-African fathers wanted, to speak with one voice, one continent, one voice. And we're finally getting there. We're finally beginning to bury the Berlin Conference.
Okay, African Union. What is it? What is it all about?
African Union. Remember when our Pan-African leaders met in 1964 and created OAU? It was during that wonderful Organization of African Unity. That's when Kwame Nkrumah proclaimed Africa was for the Africans and African Union now. 55 years later, we are yet to attain that perfect African Union. But that's okay. We are getting there. He also proclaimed you were not African because you were born in Africa, but rather you were African because Africa is born in you. Now, this is the most beautiful part. Yes.
Nice.
As I've lived in this country, I've met many people who may never have been born in Africa or never have even set foot in Africa, but they have Africa born in them. So I see a lot of brothers and sisters who may not look like me, but they're definitely Africans. Since 1964, after the creation of the OAU, the whole purpose of the OAU was to rebuild the Africa and destroy the boundaries that were imposed upon us during the Berlin Conference. It's been difficult because remember that seed of divide and conquer, it's deep among us. Trying to get us to work together. We are so divided among tribal lines, religious lines, even now racial lines and national lines. So we are very divided people. But getting us to realize that we are suffering from the legacy of colonialism is work in progress. We must keep preaching. People must have a serious conversation with the image in the mirror because the healing starts here.
How about your job, your mission?
My mission, I have sent here by the 55 African heads of states and my chairman, Musa Faki Mahamat, two major mandates: to promote Africa in the Americas and also to strengthen the bridges between Africa and the Americas and to bring the children of the diaspora back home.
There are challenges, of course.
Yes, there are.
Poverty still.
Yes,
conflict, literacy, but education moving along. Health. You're a physician.
Serious.
You're a physician.
That is a serious problem. People are not aware. If all the continental African doctors were to return home today, we're only going to meet about 20% of the need. Africa needs at least 1.2 million doctors today. So as you can imagine, no amount of money put into healthcare in sub-Saharan Africa is going to deliver the desired results because the capacity is simply not there. There are more African doctors, Ghanaian African doctors, in New York City alone than in the whole country. The same is true with Nigeria and many other countries. The same is true with education and all other sectors. The capacity that Africa needs to take its rightful place on the world stage is in the diaspora. And this is because of the brain drain. And the brain drain goes back to starting with the ones that came across the Atlantic in shackles, followed by the ones who came across the Atlantic in search of greener pastures. The result is the only ingredient that is missing for Africa to move forward are its children. So that is why the African heads of states and the African Union Commission are committed to see to it that we repatriate, we reverse the brain drain.
So let's look at some of the horrors of colonialism and neocolonialism. So colonialism is a dark chapter in the dark history which has left lasting scars on the African continent. Like just how the doctor has said. So while the overt chains of colonialism have been removed, the echoes of its horrors persist in the form of neocolonialism. So exploring the profound and enduring impact of both colonialism and neocolonialism on Africans today is shedding light on the challenges that continue to haunt the continent. It's still happening till now. So colonialism is hurting the economic sector of Africa. The cultural it's affecting the culture. It's causing cultural erosion. It's causing political instability. It's causing social injustices. It's causing resource extraction. So we want to look at each point. Now, the economic exploitation effect of colonialism or neo-colonialism. I think the right word I should use is neo-colonialism. So colonial powers plundered Africa's rich resources, leaving nations impoverished. Although political independence have been achieved, neo-colonial economic structures persist in Africa even till now. African nations often find themselves ensnared in debt, forced to adhere to unfair trade agreements that perpetuate their economic independence. This is true. See what's happening in West Africa to those countries who have refused to remove their alliance with the French. They're still being exploited till today. You know, you're born into debt, a child is born into debt, a child dies into debt, which is something which should not happen. A debt that we don't know how it came to be. Okay, let's move to the second point. We have cultural erosion. So imposition of foreign cultures during colonial rule disrupted traditional African societies. Neo-colonial forces continue to exert influence over cultural narratives. It's now shaping perceptions and African values. So this cultural erosion erodes the rich tapestry of indigenous cultures, leading to a loss of identity and heritage among Africans. Now, the third one, which it causes, according to my research, is political instability. Anywhere the French are, the apple does not fall far from the tree. Anywhere the French are, there's always political instability, and that's how it goes. There's a proverb in Swahili which says, "Inzi hufuata kinyesi." You see, the fly, the house fly, it always follows where there's feces. Where there's feces, you'll always find the fly. It's like they are friends, you know? It's like where there's smoke, there has to be fire. So let's look at political instability. So the arbitrary drawing of borders during colonial times often disregarded ethnic and cultural boundaries as sown seeds of political instability. Neocolonial interference in African politics, whether overt or covert, exacerbates conflicts and undermines the establishment of stable and effective governance. That's how political instability is affecting Africans. So we have the fourth one, which is social injustices. Colonialism entrenched racial hierarchies and discriminatory practices. Although overt racism has been diminished, its legacy persists in subtle forms. Neocolonial structures often perpetuate social injustices, limiting access to education, healthcare, and employment opportunities for many Africans. The fifth one, we have resource extraction. Resource extraction in South Africa, in Kenya, in Libya, in Niger, the uranium, countless, in Congo, countless, how they do resource extractions illegally, you know. So according to resource extractions, effect of colonialism, colonizers exploited Africa's natural resources without regard for sustainability. Neocolonial actors continue to exploit these resources, contributing to environmental degradation and depriving local communities of their livelihoods. This perpetuates a cycle of poverty and inequality in Africa. Africans are poor, but them folks are growing them rich. And Africans are growing poor. African folks growing poor, Western folks growing rich. But whatever is making people grow wealthy is coming from Africa. So ironical. So the horrors of colonialism and neocolonization cast a long shadow over the African continent. While the struggle for political independence has been won, the battle against the enduring socio-economic and cultural impact continues. It is crucial for the global community to recognize the injustices of the past and work collaboratively towards dismantling neocolonial structures, fostering genuine partnership and empowering Africans to shape their own destiny. Only through such efforts can the continent hope to overcome the lingering shadows and build a future rooted in justice, equality, and self-determination. Only through such things can we become a nation that is strong. When we, what practices? The practices of doing away with the puppets. The puppets has to be done away with. We can't allow the puppets no more. We can't. I'm saying it as simple as it can, but it's very, very impactful. You know, it's so horrible. It's horrifying actually when you listen to how the West were strategizing against Africa and Africans. The story of Leopold seemed to be a fairy tale. It seemed to be a story from a storybook or a novel, but it's true. 10 million Africans were killed by Leopold. That is something that even Henry Kissinger, maybe someone like Henry Kissinger is the one who would have done this thing. I don't know what makes these people think that they have the right to massacre people like that. I don't know how. And the good thing is that God didn't allow humans to live forever for such reasons, you know. We were not allowed to live forever for such reasons. It would have been disaster if people would have lived for such longer. Somehow the comfort that humans have, or the comfort that Africans had at that time, is that Africans, or rather humans, inevitably die. Death is inevitable. It always knocks at every man's door at one particular moment in time. Now, about the colonialism and how the French people were doing things, I don't think it is appropriate for them to do what they did to Guinea and Guinea-Bissau. Is it Guinea or Guinea-Bissau? The Equatorial Guinea and Guinea-Bissau. It's not right. Just because someone has refused your rule in their country. Excuse me. For the time you are ruling these people, you are looting from them. There's a benefit you are making. Now the world has woken up and has told you to leave their country. Now you are forcing them to have affiliations with you. And when they refuse, you try and destroy the structures you built into their country. Why would you even take concrete and pour it into the sewage system? What kind of mental disorder is that? Humans, sometimes we can be the worst animals in this world. We can be the worst animals in this world sometimes. Why would they do that? The Berlin Conference was covered that it's going to be something of the interests to the African nations. You know, that is what they told us. It's something that's going to favor Africans. But no, it was going to solve the chaos. The doctor said they didn't want a war in the African soil. It would have been disastrous. They would have killed each other even more because they didn't know a lot about Africa in terms of terrain, in terms of topography. So Bismarck saw what was coming ahead, and he called them to Berlin in 1886 or 1885. You know, let's make Africa ours. Some even went to make Africa their personal, not even their countries. Leopold made Congo his personal country, personal, a single person, not even the country of Belgium, no, he himself. The thing still continues up to today. The looting still continues. The looting even last year, it was still continuing in West Africa, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. These countries were still being colonized. They had army bases of the French government in their countries. And it's interesting how they woke up. They kicked them away. They kicked colonialism away. You know, colonialism is not something of human rights. Colonialism is something that is hurting people. And the world today is something which favors human rights. Colonialism has to be kicked away, you know. So the French have shown interest, and the countries have decided, no, trading with this like trading with the devil. We don't want your trade no more. We don't want your aid. Also, we don't want your trade, you know. A lot of resources have been lost into the hands of the Western governments. Africans are not benefiting from what they should be benefiting from. Some people are benefiting from what Africans are benefiting from. Why would why would a child die in a hospital because of lack of electricity, while the same materials that is supposed to provide electricity, you have taken from that child and taken to your child in Europe, and an African has to die. Is the life of an African less than the life of a European child? That is a question I don't know who can answer. I don't know who can answer that question. Who decides who is more valuable than who? On what basis? On what criteria? Why is African taking the bottom line? These resources are taken from us and they are being sold back to us because we allow it to happen. Africans are now reawakening. The president, the young president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, that young man is really working hard to ensure no colonialism is taking place in his country. He's wiping and is turning every stone up and down. The stones of colonialism. He's turning them up and down and throwing them away. I'm not preaching the message against people of France, but I'm teaching a message against the bad things the French government have done to Africans. Get my point right? You know? Africans are reawakening and we love that. We love that we have people like Arikana Chihombori. They can be able to address us ahead. Tell us what we can't see for now. The messages, we Africans on the lower side who don't have the voice to speak on top. People like Arikana Chihombori-Quao, Dr. Arikana Chihombori-Quao is able to air our voices. And this is important. It's important that Africans will learn our story. Africans will learn our history. Africans will learn our politics. We need to understand our politics as Africans. When we learn our politics as Africans, it's even easier, it's even suitable to live with harmony and peace with one another. The idea that we hate each other because we are black, we are chasing brown, is something which has been installed into our mind by the colonizers. It's time Africans will look past this and see the great picture for what it is. Yes, if you love these videos, kindly do make sure you subscribe to the channel, EFK Original Documentaries. There's a reason I call it that way. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. You can support the channel on Patreon, become a member. Also, share the video, that's one way. Give a super thanks, that's another way also. I know there are too many. Choose the ones which work for you. So see you in the next one. And thank you once again for watching.